There's this awesome scene in 500 Days of Summer where the main character is going to a party and they do an awesome split screen. One part is his expectations at the party and the other part is the actual reality. And in this video, I wanted to cover what my expectations were before I became a doctor or worked in healthcare and what the reality is now as I've worked in healthcare for over 10 years. Let's kick off with the working hours. Now, when I was a student, I thought, okay, you've got to work really hard as a junior doctor, so in your first few years as a doctor, and then once you get to like consultant years or being a GP, then it's pretty chill. You can do anything you want. Kind of true, but also kind of false. The true part is your junior doctor years are super busy, but it's not like the super busy of like 10, 15, 20 years ago when you were doing 70, 80 hours a week. There may be regulations about how many hours you can work, but it is a busy lifestyle, especially if you work in certain rotations like A&E, where it can just feel like the 6 months you spend there is like a void where you come out of it and you think, what did I do outside of my working life? And the answer will be often not much. And the main factor is the shifting rota. Your rota, one day you'll be doing an 8 o'clock till 5, another day you're doing an 11 o'clock till 7, and it's that shifting rota where you just have no control and it can be disorientating. And when you reach the promised land of being a consultant or a GP, well, it's not completely plain sailing. Oftentimes you will have a lot more responsibilities. You'll be working in a department together, so there'll be people off sick or people on holiday that you need to cover. And often your working hours are not just with the patient, you have a lot more responsibilities with paperwork and other things. For example, as a GP, the classic naive medical student view, which I had a little bit, was it is a 9 to 5, quite relaxing job. Actually, what you find is that there's so much work around just seeing the patients that it takes up a lot more time. So sometimes I'm going in earlier to do blood tests, read the letters, and finishing at 5:30, 6 o'clock is a bonus day. That's a day where I've not had to admit somebody to hospital. I've not had to contact the hospital to discuss a case and those kind of things. But the other thing is, once you get to the consultant level, the GP level, you can choose to go part-time. You can choose to dictate your own life. It's not a rota that you will follow for the rest of your life. So you will have a little bit more independence, which I think is the key on this one, which is where I think some of the truth comes in. With that independence, you can sacrifice your pay and say, I don't want to work 5 days a week, I'll work 3 days a week and not get paid as much, but I will have a better quality of life. Which brings me on nicely to the second point, the pay. Now the pay, I would say, is broken down into 2 sections. Again, we're talking about the junior doctor years, and then we're talking your specialty years, the years where you've become a consultant or a GP. The junior doctor years, spoiler alert, is not great. So your average pay as an F1, so you've just finished 5 years of medical school, your first job out there is about £17, so about $24, $25, which isn't that great. You could probably work, I don't know, Mackey's for a few years, rise up among the ranks and get paid that much. There is the aspect of banding, so if you're doing more night shifts or you work in London, it might be a little bit more, so, but let's say average is at that level. Let's take into account also the fact that you've probably accumulated, I don't know, 60, 70,000 in debt because you've got through medical school. All in all, it doesn't look so good. There is incremental increases as you go through your junior doctor years. Remember, until you're a consultant or a GP, people are junior doctors, and that can last up to 10 years. By the time you're a consultant or a GP, you will be earning between 80,000 and 110,000, and that's through just general NHS pay. Some specialties allow for private work, so if you are, for example, an orthopedic surgeon, you can be doing some private work on the side, and obviously your salary will be slightly higher. It's not crazy mind-blowing amount, but actually it allows you to have a good quality of life. I work as a GP, and the money that I'm earning allows me to buy a house, have a car. I've got a Vauxhall Vectra, so yeah, splashing that cash. But no, you know what I mean. It's not like, I know in America people can earn 250 to 400,000, and but yeah, that's America. I'm quite happy with the amount I earn here in the UK. So yeah, it's not as much as over there, but you don't have to deal with Trump supporters, I guess. Balances out. Whether you said it in your interview or not, but the lure of science is what brings a lot of people to medicine. Your love of biology, your love of chemistry, and to some part physics, I guess. But is there that much science in medicine after you leave medical school? Well, your first few years working as a junior doctor, those years are pretty much secretarial. You're running around doing forms, writing the notes, requesting scans, speaking to radiology, trying to convince them to do a scan, and you probably don't even know why they need that scan. So it is a lot more secretarial, it is a lot more hands-on, and that Krebs cycle that you learned in second year is just laying dormant somewhere in your brain. probably being forgotten. Yes, you will sometimes go back to that knowledge, especially when you're doing your specialty exams, get back into learning some of that science. But to be fair, the majority of the job is a lot more protocol based. Somebody has a DVT, there'll be a DVT pathway. Somebody has a lower respiratory tract infection, there is a pathway for that and a treatment plan for that. So a lot of it in terms of after you finish medical school, you could probably get away with doing with a very basic level of understanding. So that notion of like the love for science, the exploration of science, well, in general, the day-to-day job, you probably won't be doing too much of that. So anybody who watched House MD, yeah, spoiler alert, none of that shit really happens. At least I've never seen it. Maybe they do it in infectious diseases, who knows? Patient time. That age-old thing that drew us to medicine. The love of science, the love of time with patients. Yeah, I've got another spoiler alert for you. This is like, I'm being a Debbie Downer on this one, but look, with patient time, it is so romanticized in everything we see around. So a lot of the formed opinions about being a doctor is based on TV shows when you're 16, 17, I guess, because you don't really have real experience of those situations. Very few of us have spent so much time in hospital, but we do watch TV shows like Scrubs and ER or whatever it was that we were watching back in the day, and the patient time is completely different. As a junior doctor, you spend most of your time running after a consultant, doing jobs, doing bloods, and yes, you have these little moments where you try and get to know your patient, but it's nothing like ER or Scrubs where JD is wheeling away his patient to radiology. You have porters who do that. So you really are focused on the jobs that you have, and you've got an endless list of things to get through. Now, that doesn't mean you don't get to know people. Some of your patients will be, patients that come in time and again, and you begin to form a relationship, but it isn't kind of that romantic notion of spending so much time and that notion of like getting to know your patient and their soul and all that. Yeah, you don't really get to do that, especially like later on in life when you're a specialty doctor or a consultant or a GP. As GPs, we have 10 minutes per patient. So that's at least 2-3 minutes for them to walk in and walk out. And that means you've got 7 minutes to really talk to them. And then at least 2 of those minutes is to write everything out medico-legally sound and making sure that it's coherent. So really you've got like 5 minutes to talk to that patient, to take a history, to examine them and try and get to know their soul. It doesn't work, but it's quite cool though. If you work in the same practice quite a bit, you do get to have your regulars and your favorites. And I've got a couple who are in their 90s, and I tend to put them at the end of my list just because I know that when I get to them, I don't have other patients after them, so I can just spend an extra 10-15 minutes talking to them. And that's just one way to get around the system, which really limits you in terms of how much time you have with patients. Now, before medical school, I used to work as a healthcare assistant, which is a team that helps nurses with patient care, so helping patients eat, drink, go to the toilet, all those kind of things. And it was a fantastic job. I had so much time with patients, so many cool stories, talking to so many different patients. And it kind of gave me a bit of a warped vision of what life in hospital was going to be like. I didn't quite understand what junior doctors did, because I kind of thought, okay, they may be spending as much time as I am with patients because go off the ward into another ward. But actually, that was the time I spent most with patients, and it was fantastic. The expectation was there's going to be a huge amount of time with patients. The reality is there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of tasks that you need to do, and actually the patient time that you have is very limited. But one thing I think is important to say is that the time we do have when we try and communicate is really impactful. Moving on to colleagues. Now, the expectation sometimes is that it's going to be always good banter, like the TV shows, lots of jokes, lots of messing around. You know what I mean? The reality is not always. And sometimes you can get bad apples that really can make things difficult in a team. Now, luckily, out of I think 12 rotations that I've done, only 2 was a little bit difficult because there was a bit of tension in the team, or some things didn't quite click, and often that can be really, really difficult in a team because you're together for 4 to 6 months depending on your rotation, and if you've got somebody who doesn't quite do as much as the other team members, or people who are leaving work early, then it can become a bit of a headache. And it's a topic not often talked about because as medical students, you may be shadowing a team, but you may not really pick up the internal dynamics of what's actually going on until you're a junior doctor within that team. then the shit hits the fan. The good news is it doesn't happen often, and when it does, you just got to ride it out and go through it. Like one of my first rotations as a junior doctor, one of my senior doctors would make me do a PR round. So PRs are rectal examinations, and I would have a list of patients where I would every morning go and do the round myself, and I thought that was normal until I told another F1 that, oh, this morning I did 7 PRs, and they were like, why wasn't that handed around the team? And I was like, oh, because I'm the junior doctor. So those little things, you begin to work out what is something expected for you to do and what is a little bit pushing the boat. So you pick up and you gain experience, and eventually you move on to another rotation. On the flip side, if you've got an amazing team, then it is smooth sailing. I had a job, I think it was general surgery, which was just incredible. We had a fantastic consultant, a great SHO, and we just worked as a great team. We would come in, do the ward rounds, get the tasks shared out, and then just go through the tasks between each of us. Now, we worked as a great team, but also we all had trust in each other, and I felt really comfortable to reach out to the senior team if I needed help. And really, that's how it should be. You should be able to get through your jobs, be able to trust each other, but also be able to ask for help. So I guess it's not really like Scrubs or Grey's Anatomy. You don't have time for all that shenanigans. You're on your ward and you're busy doing tasks, so you don't have time for all that other stuff. But I guess the complicating factor is that there can sometimes be some bad apples, which can make it a little bit complicated. On the plus side, that's super rare. I guess I was a little bit naive with this one. I always thought that when people know that you're there trying to help them, the interactions will often be respectable and good and positive, but actually, although it's rare, I have to say, the few interactions that you have which have been negative can really ruin your day or week. Most people are very respectable and you have a mutual understanding and a mutual respect. But one thing I've found in medicine, and one thing that isn't talked about that much, is that sometimes the gratitude from patients really isn't there. But it's pretty much the same in any other walk of life. I've seen hospitality staff being treated poorly, and it's the same with medical teams. Some people will carry some of the negativity in their life and dump it on you. If a diagnosis was missed 10 years ago, it becomes you guys miss the diagnosis even if you see them 10 years later. And one of the things I've learned is to try and be a little bit more objective in those kind of scenarios. I listen to the things that they have to say about the difficulties they've had, and I signpost them. So I say, look, I'm sorry you've had that experience, but if you wanted to make a complaint, this is the process, please feel free to do that. I'm here today to try and help you, so can I focus on that? Let me try and make things right today. And often that helps me get onto that step of let's try and get things sorted today, because you sometimes get into this cycle of, they did this wrong, they did that wrong, this was not done properly, and that can become a bit of a vicious cycle that just completely kind of goes AWOL. So yeah, it can be difficult, this part. It's not talked about that much. That's the other thing. Everybody thinks that patients are always super grateful, and by no means am I saying that all patients are ungrateful. Most patients are super respectable and awesome. It's just a few interactions that can ruin your day, that makes things challenging, but I guess it makes the job more interesting. So the hard truth of it is it can be tricky, but not everybody is going to be happy with the help that you're trying to provide. I always thought with medicine, there is a science behind it. There's a right and a wrong answer. There's a process, and if you go through the process, then you'll be able to get to the right answer. And I thought uncertainty is this very small, minute little area that's covered, and it doesn't really cause any problems. How wrong I was. It is probably the biggest challenge I have in my job as a family doctor, and it's a tricky one because we don't always have all the investigations of the hospital, so we can't do the tests there and then. We're going a lot on history. So if I see 10 people with a headache, all it takes is one person to have had a subarachnoid that we've missed that can really be catastrophic. So uncertainty is this big, heavy ball that you carry with yourself and is a tricky one to try and deal with. Now, some people deal with it in a way where they over-investigate, so where they're on one side of the scale, where they're doing too many investigations, but in their lifetime as a doctor, what they will do is tons of unnecessary investigations, give people loads of radiation, and all for the sake of just feeling safe inside. And there are people on the other side who may just be a bit gung-ho and not really listen to certain aspects of the history, or they may not do as many investigations as they need to, and they'll miss so many things. And there's this nice Goldilocks region where you try and be the best clinician that you can and not admit people when they don't need to be admitted, and not do investigations when they don't need investigations. And that can be really tricky, and that's something I'm trying to battle right now with as a GP who's been, a GP for 5 years, so still fairly early days. But uncertainty is a major component of life as a doctor, and I never really understood that concept. So what are your expectations of life in medicine, and what do you think the reality will be like? Let me know in the comments below. I've been Dr. Khaled, you've been bloody awesome. If you've enjoyed this, hit the subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.